My special thanks go to Joan, who's led us through this really tough year, and along with her co-chair David, she's done a huge amount of work to help us secure, essential funding. And I feel like we've slightly crossed the reef, if you know what I mean. We've gone through the choppy waters, and hopefully, I'd like to think that we've reached slightly calmer seas ahead. And I would also like to thank you all for being here today, and also for your support over the past year and a bit. Of course, we've relied very heavily on our lovely volunteers. Some of them are here today, but we're really grateful for your support as members. Your help has been, financial, but with your membership fees and your other donations, but you've also been so encouraging of our work and our goals. So I'm very grateful for this. So we're trying, our best to make this a thriving hub, and hopefully we're going to go from strength to strength. So now I'd like to introduce you to my fellow trustees. So we'll start with Joan, if that's okay. So you'd like to unmute yourself, Joan?
I think we're starting with Jerry, are we?
Okay. Are we not introducing the trustees? I think we are. We're introducing the trustees first.
Ah, right.
Yes. So yeah, Joan, if you just want to introduce yourself to everybody, that'd be good.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. I was getting ahead of myself there. I'm Joan McAlpine. I have been a trustee since the trust was set up last year in March. I thought it would be a wonderful way to pursue my love of Burns in my leisure time. It took over my leisure time and more besides, but I have loved every single minute of it, and I'm very proud of the progress that the trust has made in its first year.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to move on to the co-chair, Dr. David Hopes.
Thanks, Sarah. And hello, everyone. I'm Deputy Chair of Robert Burns Ellisland Trust. My day job is Head of Museums and Galleries for the City of Leeds, which is where I am at the moment. Formerly, I was Head of Collections and Interiors with National Trust for Scotland. And before that, I was Curator and Director of Robert Burns Birthplace Museum. So I've had a long association with Ellisland, a long love of the site. My natural interest, I suppose, in Ellisland is the collection. So we've been doing some work behind the scenes on the collection, preparing the site for museum accreditation, and we hope to make an application in the autumn of this year. Also have an interest in built heritage, and pleased to say that we're partway through the formation of a groundbreaking conservation plan of the site, which records something of the narrative of the built heritage of Ellisland, and I think there's certainly some new information in there. We might come to that in a bit. But also the conservation of the site, that's my interest. I've also been involved in some of the grant applications you'll hear about later as well.
Thank you very much, David. Next on my screen is Asif.
Hello everyone, I'm Asif Khan. I'm the Director of the Scottish Poetry Library. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's fine. Yes, I was invited to join the board in February this year, and my first impressions was I was really impressed by both the expertise and the passion of the board. And I came down to visit Ellisland, I think it was in May. We all got together and we had a really lovely tour of the site and the estate. And what a national treasure it is. And one of the things we're trying to do is with the Scottish Poetry Library to kind of reach out across all of Scotland and develop partnerships. And being on the board of the Robert Burns Ellisland Trust gives us a kind of perfect vehicle to do that. I've been the director of the Scottish Poetry Library for 5 years. Some of the Robert Burns projects and initiatives we've worked with. This year, for example, we did a commission with Morgan Academy Secondary School in Dundee, and they filmed an abridged version of Tam O'Shanter. And we were also commissioned by the Scottish Government to do some poetry videos for the Dublin hub. So increasingly we're doing more Burns work. On a personal professional basis, I was the Community Engagement Manager at Bristol Libraries for 13 years. And after that, I became a freelance poetry festival organiser. So I worked with local authorities in Bristol and Bath to do poetry events for the Festival of Nature in the Southwest. And more recently, I did some work with the Jamaican government with their poet laureate, Mervyn Morris. I'll be speaking later on about the business plan that I've been helping to support with the Trust. But yeah, as I said earlier, I'm really impressed by the direction of travel that the Trust is going in.
Thank you very much, Asif. So next on my screen is Professor Jerry Carruthers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see so many friends on the screen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jerry Carruthers. I'm Francis Hutchison Professor of Scottish Literature at the University of Glasgow, where I'm also co-director of the Centre for Robert Burns Studies, which I founded in 2007. This is going to get very boring in a moment. I'm general editor of the multi-volume Oxford University Press edition of the works of Robert Burns. I'm a proud honorary member of the Burns Clubs of Atlanta, Greenock, Irvine and Helensburgh, I think among others. And I am honorary advisor to the National Trust of Scotland on Burns. Moving a wee bit beyond that, I'm on the advisory committee for Walter Scott's Library at Abbotsford. So there's an interesting sort of cross-border connection there that we've been making work already a bit. I served on the Research and Ethics Committee for Paisley Museum, and I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, serving on their Regional Strategy Committee, and I very much have Ellisland in mind in that role. I've been secretary as a trustee of this board since March 2020.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a very quiet life you lead. While I have you, Jerry, please could you introduce Ian, our fellow trustee who is not with us today, Ian Brown, if you don't mind, please.
Professor Ian Brown, the filthy beast, is enjoying a holiday on Dartmoor at the moment. Ian comes to us with experience with the English Arts Council as a former professor at Queen Margaret University, Edinburgh. And he's a playwright and a poet, as well as an academic. He comes with also the experience of being a previous chair of the Saltire Society and the Association for Scottish Literary Studies. So Ian comes with a long subject and also public policy background in the kind of things that we're trying to do at Ellisland.
And Ian has been writing all our policy papers, of which there are many. So we're very grateful for that, because that's been a big piece of work this year. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Emily Smith. Do you want to introduce yourself, Emily?
Yeah, hello everybody. Hi, Emily Smith, although Emily McLennan today. I forgot to change my name. I joined the board about this time last year. This is the first board I have ever been part of, so it's a big learning curve for me, and really enjoying learning from everyone else, all the other trustees. But hopefully I can add a bit of local knowledge. I grew up just up the road from Ellisland, went to school in Thornhill, and have a big interest in our local history and our heritage. I'm a singer and a musician, so Burns has been a big part of my musical life. I mainly started my performing life as a traditional musician, so I've covered a lot of his material, and yeah, excited to see how things are going to develop at Ellisland. It's such a beautiful site, and I want to, help to share it with the world, not only the location but the music and the work that Burns wrote there. So I look forward to helping develop events that might happen at Ellisland. And in the last few years I've done a lot of work in education. I work mainly for Face Ross, which is a Gaelic music organisation, putting traditional musicians into primary schools across Dumfries and Galloway. So I enjoy teaching the kids all about our traditional music, Scots language, Gaelic language, and look forward to helping maybe develop a programme that could bring children to the site as well, and they could learn more about Scots and Burns.
Thank you very much, Emily. And now we'll go across the pond to Washington, and we'll speak to Ian Houston, if you're around, Ian.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm the lesser of the two Ians on the board. It's such a pleasure to be with everyone. And I thank actually David and Joan for the opportunity to be a trustee. David specifically, he and I had a chat that was several months back, where he was broadcasting from Ellisland, and that was quite inspiring to me. And it led to this opportunity, and so it's such a pleasure to work with the board and the membership, and to be a part of things going forward. Burns, of course, the first Burns supper that we have recorded was a celebration of the death of Burns in July. And then that slowly became a celebration of his life, perhaps for me, a metaphor of Ellisland, that we celebrate the life, the embodiment of his words that are living now, and that Ellisland is not dead. It's Ellisland is a place of thought and ideas. That's what we celebrate. We don't celebrate its death. We celebrate its future and its present, which has much opportunity. I'm currently the president of the Scottish Business Network here in the US, and serve as ambassador for SBN, promoting trade engagement with Scotland between the United States, North America, and Scotland and the UK. I have a foreign policy and foreign service background, and worked in Congress for a while, and served as the executive director of the American Foreign Service Association. And my dad is from Glasgow. My mom is from Leamington Spa. I grew up in California, where they ended up about 30 years old. I'm a writer. I write for the Herald Scotland, a monthly column called Letter from America, where I put a couple of pieces in there about Burns. And I also write poetry. I have a book of poetry that I published in 2019. So really my pleasure to be a part of the positive energy. I think we are a modest but growing group of committed individuals. So it's just such a pleasure, as you say, across the pond to sort of help move this forward. And so nice to meet everyone. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. I should introduce myself. So my name's Sarah, and I grew up in France. As you know, Burns spoke a bit of French, so I'm proud of that link. I was born in Edinburgh, but I grew up in France, and I now live in Lockerbie with my family. You may know my daughter Rose Byers, who's the young ambassador for Ellisland, and she's a keen Burns singer. My background is media, so I was a production editor for many years for magazines such as Dumfries and Galloway Life. I worked at the Herald for many years, and now I'm a media manager for a big forestry and transport company. And I have been coming to Ellisland for many years, and yes, through Rose, I fell in love with Burns, and yes, so I'm very excited about our year ahead at Ellisland. So thank you, everybody. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. I don't think I have. So now I'd like to give the floor to Jerry, who's going to talk to us about why Ellisland matters and its growing recognition as one of the most important sites in the life of Burns. Take it away, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I think over the next 8 minutes or so, just to give you a sense of the full doom of it all, I want to push some buttons. We know a lot about Ellisland, and I'm going to try and share screen now as well. And there's a lot we don't know about Ellisland, I would want to say. And there are some things people think that they know about Ellisland that might not be true. And that kind of revisionism that I think we're going to be inserting into the coming years about Ellisland is something that people might have to get used to. Symbolically, on my less than good slideshow, I have the back of the main farm building, a less than usual view perhaps from the orchard, more or less, which I'm very interested in. And one of my words, which sounds like a kind of a buzzword, maybe it is a buzzword in some ways, that I've been thinking about a lot apropos Ellisland recently, is perspective. In terms of significance, in terms of research, we need to develop perspective on Ellisland, and I'm going to try and explain what I mean by that. In the research we want to do, in the research that we've begun, this research in fundamental ways needs to speak to the plans we have for curation, to exhibition, to vision, and overall to creating a world-class heritage site at Ellisland. Let's start with something fairly obvious that we know, but again hasn't been emphasised enough. Ellisland essentially is the first marital home of Robert Burns with Jean and with his family. And in some ways that makes it more significant than Alloway, Burns Cottage there. And we've never quite grasped that narrative, that this is Burns in the full bloom of his employment, in the full bloom of his creativity, and living with Jean as part also of a domestic economy on the farm. And that also is a narrative that people have sort of brought out, but never fully enough. The part of Jean, quite rightly, what is Burns's wife's significance in Ellisland, in his life and in her own life? And that is something that we need to do more about. Ellisland as a working farm in Burns's day, as his first marital home, as perhaps the most significant domestic setting of the 5 or 6 domestic settings that we might identify for Burns. Recently, David Hopes has alluded to this, and here's a picture of David and Dr. Will Napier. We've had a conservation report commissioned for the site, and I don't want to say too much about that. We'll hear more about this later, but already this has thrown up questions about, for instance, where Burns might actually have lived when he first arrived ahead of his family taking up residence. Lots of things are repeated in the lore of Ellisland, which might be true, or which might be not exactly true. Certainly, as we enter the centenary of the original Ellisland Trust, we need to go back and look at the post-Burnsian history, the past 100 years, and indeed the 19th century, and to reconstruct how the site has been tended, how it's been conserved. And David Hopes has got a 2-part essay in next year's Burns Chronicle that makes much of the archives and the records of the Trust down to last year to tell something of that story, and retrieving that story is a necessary part of the archaeology for the site, the cultural archaeology for the site, to show what has happened. So just to kind of signal ahead to that, that's a very rich story and a story that we're going to have to do something with. Now, the conservation report also begins to address areas for future archaeology. And there have been excavations previously at Ellisland by the University of Glasgow in the early 90s, and we need some new archaeology at Ellisland. And we need this in 2 ways. First of all, we need it around Burns's domestic setting to tell us more about what happened. For instance, some of you will know this, the alleged smashed window. Did that actually happen? Burns smashing the window a week or 2 after he leaves Ellisland in 1791. The archaeology will be able to prove or disprove that. But there's a second way in which we need archaeology around Ellisland, because when I use this buzzword perspective, it's perspective on the living space of Robert Burns, but also a wider space, which we ought to be excited about, and also a longer historic space. And part of that space has to do with the path to Friars Carse, where we've got Burns's great friend and indeed collaborator, as I've often argued, Robert Riddle, and the path along the Nith to Friars Carse, and indeed wider paths that we'll say more about beyond Ellisland, but from Ellisland, are things that we need to get a perspective on. And if you go along from Ellisland to Friars Carse, one of the things that we encounter is one and perhaps two sites that have to do with Roman history. And Burns himself is interested in that history, largely inspired by Robert Riddle, who gets him into things medieval as well. So these are powerful influences on Burns's imagination, especially as Burns thinks about his own immediate landscape. And also what we begin to see is that wider Dumfries and Nithsdale story. As some of you will know, in January was published a report into Burns and the cultural tourist economy of Dumfries and Upper Nithsdale and how we might make more of that. And what some of that boils down to, quite rightly, is making connections to Friars Carse, to other places in Dumfriesshire. We need to work on the archaeology of the Roman forts as part of our wider Ellisland brief at some point with the Dumfriesshire County archaeologist. So there's a wider story, a story of things like Roman history that Burns was certainly interested in, but interesting in its own right. And the other bit that we can overlay here in terms of perspective, one of our big themes at Ellisland, obviously enough, is environment. It's a drop-dead gorgeous place, and there's a lot to be done in terms of the environmental cultural heritage, which in some ways Burns is only one part of. So that perspective on environment is a theme that we need to develop in terms of significance. It's quite difficult to find 18th century depictions of Friars Carse. We usually see pictures of it as the venerable baronial 19th century pile that it is, but we need to begin to grasp Friars Carse in the 18th century, where Robert Riddle, along with Robert Burns, is a great Imagineer, thinking about Scottish history, thinking about Scottish song. And again, one of the things that we've begun to look at Ellisland are trails, including poetic trails around the site and beyond. So trails and perspectives, these are things that we need to develop underpinned by research. And this extension out the way to that wider Dumfriesshire significance goes beyond the Ellisland years, but it's happening within the Ellisland years when Burns is thinking about libraries, is thinking about theatres. I'm pleased to see that Jenny Wilson is here today. Arguably, one Dumfries site that we might pick out is, in Burnsian terms, the most neglected, the Dumfries Theatre Royal, which Burns was party to founding after the Ellisland years. But we need perspective on his career in the Ellisland years and in the subsequent Dumfriesshire years, including with things like theatre. The 1790s, the Dumfriesshire years, is when Burns very much becomes involved in both local and international politics. It's where his excise career really happens. It's where he's especially interested, although he had been previously, in both Jacobitism and the new Jacobinism. And somehow Burns in Dumfriesshire, Burns in Ellisland, these things, these big themes, these big interests of Burns have never been properly enough, I would argue, wrapped around Robert Burns, his writing career, his biography. And we've got the pastoral setting. There's Ellisland again, one of the finest depictions of Ellisland from the 19th century, I think from the 1820s. And this is a place, of course, which is inspirational to Burns. And this moves us to one of my hobby horses, which is the claim that Ellisland is one of the great cradles of European romantic song. The Centre for Robert Burns Studies at Glasgow has begun some research. Dr. Moira Hansen, under the direction of Professor Kirstine McHugh, who's a song scholar, has been compiling a database. We may have as many as 135 songs written at Ellisland. Moira has gone some way down the track of cataloguing 75 of those, including things like settings, performance, and composers who have turned to Burns. Some of you have heard me on examples of the European composers, past and present, who have resorted to the Ellisland canon of songs. Haydn, providing a setting for My Lass She's But a Lassie Yet. Arvo Pärt turns to that more recently. Schumann does a version. We've got James Macmillan among living composers doing a setting of Lament of Mary Queen of Scots. So the point is that the heritage of romantic song is very rich of the texts that come out of Ellisland. So some themes: the history of Burns and his family, of Jean, of the domestic rural economy, the history of Burns's creativity, his imagination beyond to Dumfriesshire, environment as heritage, Ellisland as cradle of European romantic song. These are big, big things that have never properly been embraced at Ellisland through no one's fault. There's always been lots of good people working hard with limited resource. The challenge now is to find the resource and the full panoply of research resources as well to empower these themes towards making Ellisland an internationally important heritage site. And again, one of my hobby horses, which I know other members of the board are keen on, and especially when we've got great people like Emily and Rose around us, one vision might be what a great site this would be for a Scottish Centre for Song and Songwriting, capturing some of that great song heritage of Robert Burns and indeed of Europe. Dumfriesshire has a huge, has a slightly dusty jewel in the crown with Ellisland. It needs a bit of polishing, it needs a bit of resource, and we have the most amazing heritage site potentially. So that's just some buttons being pushed. People may have questions, might come up later, but that's hopefully just to whet the appetite a wee bit, and perhaps even, no apologies, potentially to challenge people, including myself, in terms of what are we going to do about the significance of Ellisland. And I'll stop that whistle stop tour there, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jerry. So many big themes to explore, and that was really fascinating. So the next item on the agenda is a trustees report, which is going to be presented by Joan, who's going to be talking about what we've been doing in this first year.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm going to attempt to show how we have been polishing the jewel in the crown that is Ellisland over our first year. I first of all wanted to congratulate and thank Sarah for stepping up as chair. She'll be absolutely fantastic. My interest in Ellisland began with the Robert Burns and the Scottish Economy report by Glasgow University, and I'm pleased to see that Professor Pittock, who wrote that report, has joined us. I led debates in Parliament on the report and the potential that Burns has in terms of generating economic benefit to Scotland. And as I live in Dumfries and Galloway, particularly Dumfries and Galloway, Professor Pittock's report showed that Robert Burns generated over 200 million for the Scottish economy, but there was so much more potential. A large part of that was in Ayrshire. And one of the things that we've tried to do over the first year at Ellisland is basically kind of lead in development of the Burns economy in Dumfries and Galloway to make sure that we have a world-class visitor attractions that capitalise on what Jerry was saying, why it's one of the most important sites in Burns' life, and in particular in his creative development. The Robert Burns Ellisland Trust was formed in March 2020 out of the Ellisland Trust, which had owned the site since 1922, and the Friends of Ellisland, which was formed to support them in recent decades. Neither of those two charities now exist. They've been replaced by this Robert Burns Ellisland Trust. It's a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, and that governance structure was designed to allow the charity to operate more effectively in the modern world. And it's a membership-based SKIO, which is why you're all here today at our AGM. The board immediately set out a vision and some goals and objectives. You all should have the trustees report, and you can read about them there. The vision was that Ellisland is the place to fall in love with Burns and offers a unique opportunity for learning, creativity, and to escape and indeed experience the natural environment through the poet's eyes. So just as Ellisland inspired some of Burns' greatest works, we believe that Ellisland today can inspire the current and future generation. The Trust set a number of objectives which we have gone some way towards meeting, which is in the Trustees report, and that's despite the challenges of COVID, which coincided unluckily with us taking over custodianship of the site. So first of all, we set out to improve Ellisland's financial security by setting out goals to control costs. We launched a fundraising drive and to expand our membership. We took the cost of factoring in-house, thereby reducing professional fees. We changed the opening hours and restructured the staffing operation. With regards to raising grant funding, we've secured £82,972 in grants for the year up to March 2021, and the period after that will be addressed by Dr. Hopes later. So this grant funding included £19,500 from the Heritage Lottery Fund's Emergency Funding Programme, almost £19,000 from Museums Galleries Scotland for both digital infrastructure and to help with marketing, business development and fundraising. There was £12,000 from Historic Environment Scotland towards the conservation plan, which Jerry Carruthers mentioned, and that includes a scheme of repairs, which Dr. Hopes will talk to later. We also received £4,000 from Aldgirth Community Council for a sit-on lawnmower, which has helped us transform the grounds. Around £7,000 of European funding from Wigton Festival Company. That's to do with literature tourism, and it launched the Footsteps of Burns, which is a fantastic family-orientated website promoting Burns sites in and around Dumfries, including Ellisland. And I would encourage you to have a look at that. It really is fantastic. The Hollywood Trust, a very important local charity, allowed us to repurpose just over £5,000 of a previous grant, which had been interrupted by the pandemic, and we were allowed to repurpose that towards core costs and volunteer developments. And in addition to all that, we received £16,000 of unrestricted government COVID emergency grants. And it goes without saying, we are extremely grateful to all our funders over this first year. It's made the difference to Ellisland succeeding or failing, and it's well more than that. It's helped us develop in the professional direction that we intend to go. So we're very, very grateful. Another of our initial goals was to increase our membership, and Sarah's already alluded to that. At the time of the trustees report, we had tripled the membership, and now we've quadrupled it for individual members. We've also launched a special membership tier for Burns clubs, which is called the 1788 Circle, the year that Burns came to Ellisland. And I want to extend my thanks to those who have joined the Hamilton Burns Club, the Coldstream Burns Club, Ayrshire Association of Burns Clubs, Glasgow District Association, Lamlash Burns Club, Eaglesham Burns Club, and the South Jersey Celtic Society Burns Club in the United States, our first overseas Burns Club. And these have been joined this month by the Dumfries Howth Club, a very welcome local addition, and the Centre for Robert Burns Studies at Glasgow University. Thank you all for your support. In addition to this, we've launched two fundraisers, one to address the first lockdown and the Auld Lang Syne campaign in late 2020. Auld Lang Syne was, of course, written at Ellisland and is possibly the most famous song in the world. We've received over 11,000 in donations this year, 4,000 through Just Giving. And again, thank you everyone who has helped in that regard. Another objective that we set was to develop our volunteer offer. We're very grateful to the gardening and maintenance volunteers who we inherited from the old trust, who worked to get the exterior of the site looking neat and tidy for our reopening this summer, and also to our new front of house tour guides. To achieve this objective, we created a volunteer support role, which was supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund, Museum Galleries Scotland and the Hollywood Trust. We launched a volunteer drive and developed a range of different opportunities from curatorial to front of house, along with training materials. and we created a volunteer handbook, and we also put on online training session on the visitor experience with Anna Sanchez from the National Trust for Scotland's Tenement House in Glasgow, and also Dr. Hopes gave a talk on the treasures of Ellisland, and we hope to develop that into an event for members soon. The charity's purpose for public benefit include the advancement of education. Of course, the pandemic meant no more school visits. However, we did set ourselves goals to have online education events. There was a talk from Professor Crothers on the historic importance of Ellisland Farm, and we also had an evening of Burns songs and readings, which Emily sang at, as did Rose and many of the people attending today, and that was hugely well supported. We've also worked with students at Glasgow University to develop teaching resources. A related goal with education concerns our unique collection. We've purchased equipment to allow us to display and store it more safely, including environmental monitoring and specialist cleaning equipment. And we're very grateful to Dumfries and Galloway Council's Museums Department for their advice on how to look after the collection. It's now also being properly catalogued, and we've adopted new collections policies. We're giving visitors access to our collection now through guided tours. If you have not booked one yet, please go to our website and book one. They are free to members, and where you can go to the website, you can also see highlights of the collection, and that's new in terms of increasing accessibility. Another of the goals we set was to obtain museum accreditation, which David has spoken about and may speak more about. Museum accreditation maximises funding opportunities, and it allows you to start work on having your collection recognised as one of national significance. We know that Ellisland's collection is of national significance, but we need to achieve museum accreditation to have that officially recognised. Also, to achieve museum accreditation, you need to develop professional policies. We've developed 14 new professional policies, and I'm grateful to Professor Brown for leading on that. The other goals include developing partnerships. So as well as the wonderful funders that I have mentioned, I wanted to draw attention to South of Scotland Enterprise, who have given us a lot of practical advice and guidance, and we're very grateful. Also, Dumfries and Galloway Council, we're now part of the Burns Tourism Partnership. Also, Visit Scotland, Paula Ward from Visit Scotland has visited the site and given us advice, as has Leslie from South of Scotland Destination Alliance. We have forged relationships with private sector Burns attractions as well, such as our neighbours at Friars Carse. And if you book a tour at Ellisland, you can have a 2-for-1 high tea, or rather afternoon tea at Friars Carse. I would recommend that. And also, of course, the Globe Inn, which is also reopened and is a fantastic asset to Dumfries and Galloway. We've also achieved our other goal of commissioning the Historic Environment Scotland funded conservation plan. We're very grateful to Will Napier, the Chartered Surveyor expert in historic buildings, who's undertaking that work. And of course, it's opened up that relationship with Historic Environment Scotland, which didn't exist at Ellisland before, and that's really, really important. Our activity has resulted in extensive media coverage, which has all been driven by the trustees, and I'm really grateful to all the journalists who have given us our support, their support over the last year. It's been really, really important. So Ellisland's profile is now much higher than it was within the Burns community, but out with the Burns community too. Our trustees report shows us performing well, therefore, against our own objectives and our charitable purposes in year one. So again, I would like to join Sarah in thanking everyone who has helped us, our trustees, volunteers, our funders, staff, and of course, most importantly of all, perhaps you, our expanded membership. We are on the start of a journey to ensure that Ellisland is recognised as the best place to fall in love with Burns, and I look forward to continuing that journey with you in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joan. We had a question during your talk about the cost of club membership. So just to go through that again, the individual membership is £15. As you know, the club membership is £200, and that's open to all federated clubs. And then we also have the Glencairn Circle, which is for patrons, and that's £500 upwards. So, you know, that's open to businesses, to individuals, to anybody who would like to support us a bit further. So now I'd like to turn to Dr. David Hopes, who's going to talk to us about the annual accounts.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I notice I've got 3 minutes to do this, really, and that's almost exactly the length of time it takes for kettle to boil. So if numbers aren't your thing, I won't mind if you switch your camera off and go and make a brew. So I'll zip through the accounts, which you should all have a copy of, as quickly as possible. Now, it says on the title page that they're unaudited. That's a technicality. They have actually been audited. It's just we're below the threshold for being called audited. So they have actually been audited by Armstrong Watson, thanks to them. They cover the period 20th of February 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. So they started just before the new trust was formed on the 2nd of March 2020. You'll see at the beginning of the accounts on page 2 that we've got objectives, and Joan alluded to these in her overview. The main objectives in terms of the finances were to stabilise and improve the financial position of RBET Ellisland from a starting point of around £58,000 to build understanding and resilience. So Joan spoke about the conservation plan, Jerry spoke about significance and the beginnings of research. Joan also spoke about the funding that we got for building resilience from Museum Galleries Scotland, and also the funding from Historic Environment Scotland. I see Pauline Megson's on the call today, so hi Pauline, and thanks for the support. So we started with a balance of around about £58,000, thanks to the Friends of Ellisland and the Old Trust. But we closed with a balance of £93,482, so that's an improvement of £35,136. So it's a step in the right direction, I think. Page 3 show actions, how we achieved that improvement in finances. The first was a reduction of expenditure. So we changed staffing arrangements and opening hours. We reduced significantly our factoring fees, and we also improved our utilities usage, which was fairly hefty. Second thing we did was, as Joan has pointed out as well, we went for grant funding. So we got almost £87,000 over the course of the year from 9 different sources. Third area in terms of how we achieved the improvement was membership growth. So I don't want to go over that again. Joan has described that. One thing we should say, and not necessarily apologise for, but we increased the membership fee from £10 to £15. So I hope you don't mind that, but it has led to a great improvement in our finances, and your support is really appreciated. Page 8, zipping through the accounts here, page 8 looks ahead, and you can see that we've described ourselves as a going concern. That's because that we will have a slight deficit at the end of next year. But it's not as much as appears in the accounts, we don't think, because we underestimated how much income we might take. So the deficit there is about 27,000. I think it's more likely to be about 18,000. And because we have unrestricted reserves of around 78, almost 79,000, we're still a going concern. We reckon we can cover costs, basically. So it's been a joint effort to get to this point. Thanks to our accountants, Armstrong Watson. Does anyone have any questions if you've made your cup of tea or your coffee or whatever you're having? If we don't have any questions, we need someone to propose the accounts and someone to second them.
So if you'd like to propose, would you like to put your hand up? I'll try and see if I can. Derek Murdoch is proposing. Anybody? Thank you, Derek. Anybody to second? Bob McDonald, thank you very much. So that's it. Proposed and seconded. Thank you. Grand, right. Well, we'll talk about a very important aspect of our first year. We've finally we've got a business plan and a business review. So I'd like Asif, please, if you could talk to that.
Thank you, Sarah. David said 3 minutes was long enough to boil a cup of tea. I think 5 minutes is long enough to dash Scotland's hopes in any football match. So it won't be an anticlimax. As was previously mentioned, funding came through from Museums Galleries Scotland Recovery and Resilience Fund to enable the Trust to tender for a business review. And in spring this year, we commissioned CGM Accountancy to lead on this, and I'm pleased to see Colin McNally as part of this Zoom meeting at AGM. And I'd like to give thanks to Colin, Karine Burns and Tracy McNally for the splendid endeavour they did for the work on this, and they were a pleasure to work with. Anecdotally, this is the Scottish Poetry Library. We're in the process of producing our second business plan in 5 years. And I found the whole process with Ellisland both positive, informative, but above all, it was enjoyable. And the amount of research and mapping that we did to kind of position where Ellisland Burns Trust, where it came from, where it's going to, and I think it plays testimony to the almost a century's worth of work that the Trust has done to get to where we are. As detailed in the trustees report, the board had invested a lot initially in the first year, the new board, of energy in the development of the business up to the current commission. And what I'll do is, I think I went over the board papers, there was a kind of précis of the business plan. I'll pick some of the highlights from the business plan just now. So I need to put my glasses on as I'm getting older. So the vision of the Trust is committed to the conservation and development of Ellisland Museum and Farm as a cultural heritage asset of national and international repute, a place that inspires creativity, supports learning and nurtures well-being. So the mission of the Trust is, as previously been said, it's Ellisland is a place to fall in love with Burns and to see nature through the poet's eyes. It was here where Burns set up his first marital home with Jean Armour, and it was the only home that Burns had designed. So what is it we're actually celebrating? We want to increase the understanding of Ellisland as central to Burns' artistic development. And as Jerry had said, where he'd written over 130 pieces of some of Scotland's national treasures in the canon of song and poetry. We also want to spotlight the environmental importance of the estate as the best place to see the natural world through the poet's eyes. We want to increase appreciation of Ellisland as one of the foundational sites for European romantic song, as Jerry so eloquently described earlier on. But also we want to foreground the importance of the role and contribution of Jean Armour too. It really was a family home, and Jean was important to that. And finally, we want to celebrate Scots writing and music. And as previously mentioned, one of the ambitions is for it to be a centre for song and songwriting. So to meet these, what's the focus going to be? So we have identified 4 pillars of work we will focus the energy over the next 4 years. We want to develop Ellisland as a first-rate visitor attraction, a vibrant hub of learning, a welcoming space and sanctuary for well-being, and an inspiring place for artists to develop their creative practice and form. As has previously been mentioned, particularly in the trustees report, we have a good track record of partnership working with Burns associated attractions. For example, earlier this year, we led on the commissioning of the In the Footsteps of Burns website, showcasing attractions and venues in and around Dumfries. It's good to see Murray Pittock here as well, because the Pittock report really helped inform the development of the business review and the business plan. And in the report, there was research cited by Nesta on the potential value of cultural heritage assets, not only economically, but also increasing community pride, confidence and well-being. And we hope that kind of this business review and business plan really speaks to engaging with the local community and the engagement with communities in the development of the site. As is mentioned before, we're applying for accredited museum status, and the benefits of achieving accreditation helps the museum to attract financial support from external sources. It helps to showcase the organisation's fitness to receive sponsorship and donations, and it helps to raise awareness to stakeholders and improve planning skills. As part of the process, the board identified 20 key priority areas for actions over the next 4 years. And I won't run through them, but they're presented within the report. And some of these actions will be brought forward if the Trust is successful in its applications to the Adapt and Thrive UK Community Renewal Fund. So what are the other priorities of the organisation? Well, there's 3 thematic priorities that cut across the pillars. These are romance, these are the environment, and Scots language and song. For example, with romance, we can really position and offer Ellisland as a unique wedding venue. Looking at the environment, the board will explore the potential of green energy programmes to support the site's sustainability. And looking at Scots language and song, one of the things we'll be doing is hosting an annual celebration of Scots language through both music and poetry. We also plan to introduce high-value tourism opportunities reflecting the unique heritage of the site. One example being is the unique opportunity to write in the same room as Burns. Looking ahead to what will successful look like. From year 1, we're looking at core income target of 85,000. By May 2025, we're looking to increase that to 208,000. And how are we going to do that is increase revenue from our trading and other sources. And these sources include grass rent, shop sales, donations, project management fees, and the membership. And if you look on page 7 of the business plan, it kind of demonstrates where this income will come from. Currently, income from membership is around 37%, and income from trading is about 36%. By the end of year 4, we're looking at trading income to almost double to 64%. And by the end of year 4, we're also looking at changing the balance of the sources of the trading income. So, for example, this year, trading income sources, 21% is from visits, 36% is from events and experiences, 36% will be from accommodation. But by the end of year 4, we'll be looking at visits meeting 37% of the income, events and experiences 28%, and accommodation 16%. And we think that's a healthy and more sustainable balance of income across the board. I've kind of rattled through that, but if anybody's got any questions on the business report, I'm quite happy to answer that.
Thank you. That's very useful. So next we're going to talk about the year ahead. So there's plenty to look forward to. We're hoping to grow and grow. So David, if you'd like to tell us more, please.
Very much, yeah. Just building on what Asif was saying there in terms of the business review, which gives us clarity about the future, or some clarity about the future. We were actually successful with the Adapt and Thrive Fund. We got £41,000 from the Adapt and Thrive Fund, which is supported by the Scottish Government and the Cora Foundation. That will allow us to recruit a business development manager for a year, who will look at implementing some of the business review, exploring income streams, carrying out feasibility studies subject to future funding, etc. So that's a live recruitment, and we're really desperate to get that person in post, really, to allow us to build capacity at Ellisland. We also have another funding application which is live with the UK Community Renewal Fund, which is an interim replacement fund for some of the European structural funds. It's revenue only and must be spent by March 2022, and our bid is for £250,000. So fingers crossed on that one. As has been mentioned before about the Murray-Pittock's report, and also Jerry put into the chat, the Pittock report was the national perspective, if you like, on Burns and the economy, but there's also been a study done recently on Dumfries and Upper Nithsdale. The project proposal that we've submitted to the UK Community Renewal Fund is called Growing the Robert Burns Economy in Dumfries and Galloway. It's one of 10 selected by the local authority, by Dumfries and Galloway Council, towards the UK government, and we should hear back in the next few weeks whether that's been successful or not. If successful, the bid will benefit not only Ellisland but multiple partners in the area, so we're very hopeful of that. In terms of opening on the site, we're glad to say that we've appointed a weekend museum assistant, 2 new front of house volunteers, including Sarah and Rose, and Stuart Patterson, who's a local poet, and we're developing self-guided tours as well. We have a bungalow which is next to the historic farmstead at Ellisland, and it's being vacated at the moment. So we're looking into whether we can develop it as a holiday let, which would allow us to diversify our income generation. So we're just looking at that at the moment. So that's another thing that we might use to diversify things on the ground. We're planning events online for members. Joan mentioned a Treasures Talk that will be coming up, and also we've spoken about the conservation plan, which is being worked on at the moment. Dr. Will Napier is working on that, and I have a draft of it already. But he's agreed to do a special online talk for our members, which will be excellent, because this study is like no other, I think, of Ellisland. It's built on a condition survey that Will carried out in May, and it was really looking at the fabric of the historic footprint. And we're looking at probably about £500,000 worth of repairs that's needed. But of those, Will has very wisely prioritised the work that needs to be done. So I'm happy to say that only £3,000 worth of that £500,000 is urgent. And there's another category called necessary repairs, which is about £250,000, and then desirable is the remainder. I think we can afford to look at a phased approach to the conservation work on site. As we develop the sustainability of the site, we can also fold in the conservation work that needs to be done. But as a board, we're going to be acting on the urgent repairs, you'll be glad to know, and using volunteers wherever possible to do whatever is non-specialist on site. I won't go over museum accreditation again. I think it's been spoken about enough, but we hope to submit an application to Arts Council England by October of this year, and it will have multiple benefits, I'm sure. We should normally hear back within about 6 months, so hopefully by the spring of 2022 we'll be accredited.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now then, I'd like to open the floor to questions. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. Now, I have been asked whether the link for this AGM will be available to watch again. I'll have to come back to you on that one. We are recording it, but we're not known for our technology prowess, but I'm sure we'll manage something. So we'll put it on social media, you know, a way of accessing it if we can. There will also be minutes, so we'll release that to members. Any questions? No. Is there a volunteer training scheme in place? So yes, we do have a volunteer training scheme. So Joan, would you like to speak about the volunteer training scheme, please? We are desperately looking for more volunteers. So we have a fantastic group who look after the site and the garden. We are looking for people who might be interested in giving tours. That would be extremely helpful. We are looking for volunteers who might be able to look after some archiving. We are looking for people who might be interested in engaging local people, local young people in particular. So there's a whole range of volunteers we would love to have, but any skills we would be so grateful for help. So Joan, would you like to talk to us about volunteers?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I think you've more or less covered it actually in terms of the different volunteer roles that we're looking for. I think at the moment, the most pressing need is for front of house volunteers. We are offering guided tours. And if people want to come forward, we have training materials on that. I mentioned Anna Sanchez, who gave a talk to our volunteers earlier this year on the visitor experience, and that's been recorded, as had David's contribution on the Treasures of Ellisland, which helps you with the collection. But our volunteer coordinator, Avril, along with David, has produced materials on the front of house collection, and we do have quite a lot of reading material too. So if people would like to volunteer for front of house, that would be most welcome. But there's all sorts of other roles that you can volunteer for as well, everything from conservation to gardening. If you go to our website, you'll see the link in which you can contact us and come in and speak to Avril, our volunteer coordinator, and we can take it from there. We're also looking at ways that we can safely develop tours that are not necessarily guided tours, but self-guided tours. We have to make sure we can do that in a COVID safe way, but also in a way that safeguards the collection. And Avril's working on that at the moment. So it could be that some of our front of house volunteers don't necessarily have to lead guided tours. I know that's not necessarily for everyone. It's kind of jumping in at the deep end for some. Other people have taken to it like a duck to water, to extend the metaphor. But, like front of house volunteers don't just have to give guided tours. So don't be shy about coming forward if you can, greet visitors, man the shop, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of Burnsians in the call. So, if it's something you fancy, please go to the website and get in touch.
And even if it's, an afternoon a month, we'll be very grateful for anything. Now, Irene has very kindly said, congratulating us on making it through the pandemic and for setting a path of positive direction. Thank you for your work. That's very kind. Thank you very much, Irene. We have a question about the Year of Scotland Stories, which is 2022. Jerry, I think we are, you will agree that it's something that we're looking at.
Yes, indeed, Sarah. I think it's something we need to be involved in some level. And already for instance, have had one or two brief chats with the likes of Jenny Wilson, who's on the call at Dumfries Theatre. So there are Year of Stories around Ellisland. And again, that thing several of us have been emphasising, the wider Dumfriesshire thing. We need to be discussing this fairly soon and applying for our share of the funding that is there for that. So yeah, that's something that's very much on the radar.
Can I maybe add to that, in that the deadline for the Event Scotland part of the funding is mid-August, and our recovery plan includes a Festival of Scots Language and Song, as Asif said. So I've already spoken to Ian Barr, the events lead at Dumfries and Galloway Council. So he's on the call. Welcome, Ian, and thanks for your support for Ellisland. However, it's not the council that applies, it's individual organisations. So that's something we're going to be working on in double quick time over the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Now, another question has been on reviewing the cost of club membership. I know that there have been some questions about the cost, which is £200. We have had the number of Burns clubs who have joined is growing, so we feel that it's a reasonable amount for the £200. Member clubs are entitled to come and visit as a group, as individuals. So we might review it at some point going forward, but at the moment it's not among our priorities. We have a question about ideas for the environment. So that's something, as you've heard, that we're very keen on developing. We'd like to reinforce the sort of green aspect of environmentally friendly aspect of Ellisland. We've talked about harnessing the power of the NIF for some electricity generation. We would like to do some work on the garden, on the orchards. So that's something that we'd like to look at more. So we will keep you in touch. We will be in touch about that aspect of things. We have a suggestion about looking at other sites for linkage to romantic song, including Barjag Tower, which is up the road, which is where Annie Laurie was born. And we have the Kirkconnell Library. So looking at a link between Burns and Dr. Maxwell. So Jerry, that's something that you may have been looking at.
Yes, to keep it brief, that's precisely the point about expanding the notion of the future landscapes, Ellisland, other repositories of song, the relationship with William Maxwell, who's got very strong French connections, etc. All these things are important. And yeah, Stephen, who's making that comment, it would be good to have a chat in future about that, by all means.
Thank you very much. Now, Ian, would you like to talk to us about international goals? There have been some questions about this, please.
Yes, I would just say certainly that's a part of the overall aspiration. We need to ensure that as court, everyone knows that Burns himself as a character is such an international figure. But I think there is a lack of understanding of these historic sites that exist in Scotland, certainly with Ellisland. I think if we speak of North America, of course, there are statues and libraries and buildings that have a Burns connection, St. Andrews societies that celebrate Burns as a figure around his birthday. So there's capacity and there's interest. But what we need to do with Ellisland is really internationalize to grow the membership. What we've learned through this experience through COVID is the power of the virtual audience. So here we all are meeting together virtually. I don't know that we would have had the confidence to pull off these sorts of gatherings that we're having right now had we not gone through this difficult experience of COVID. And I think that there are a lot of people around the world, not just North America, who want to be supportive of advancing Burns, but also important historical sites that physically preserve his memory. And as I said with my points earlier, to keep him alive, to keep him relevant, because Burns isn't just a historic character, he's a modern character. So I think that internationally that will be certainly a part of our overall goals. And I'll be speaking, Sarah, to you with Joan as well separately, because she has some international ideas. It's a critical piece of our fundraising, our support, our membership aspirations for growth, and North America most definitely is a key factor in helping move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ian. We have some lovely comments talking about what we've achieved so far. So thank you very much for that. Professor Pittock says excellent plans with a wide range of income streams and absolutely outstanding funding leverage to date. So that's very kind. Thank you very much. And now Mike Duguid, who looks after the Burns Federation newsletter, says, if any members have a topic they wish to expose to the wider Burns community, please send me an article for the bi-monthly Burns Federation's newsletter, which I edit. Articles are usually around 500 words. The longer ones are welcome. Claire says, very impressed with plans and enjoyed tours of Ellisland. Thank you very much. Yes, I as Joan said, I would encourage you to attend one of the tours if you don't live too far, and it's worth making the trip for. I think it's only £5 if you're not a member. As members, you are entitled to visit for free. We have tours throughout the week and at the weekends, and we also have some enhanced tours. So if you're lucky, you may get a musical tour with Rose or a poetry tour with Stuart Patterson, who's a fantastic Scots poet. So yes, I would encourage you to come and visit. Now, if there aren't any more questions, I would like to thank you so much for attending and for your questions and your lovely comments. We're very, very grateful for your support. In talking about further steps, next steps, I'm very excited about finding out what Will Napier has uncovered in the conservation report. I mean, it's a bit depressing in a way because obviously we have a lot of repairs to do, but he has also found out lots of exciting things about the history of the buildings. So what was pre-Burns, what was post-Burns, and he's found out more about what Burns built himself. So I'd like to invite you all to a talk that will be giving. Hopefully it'll be via Zoom. We will send you a link to that, and we'll let you know when it happens in our regular newsletter. And yes, hopefully the number of events will grow, and you're very welcome to send us comments, questions, anything. The best email to send anything like that is Robert Burns Ellisland Trust @gmail.com, and that's our trust address, and we will get back to you. And yes, so thanks again. I send you my very best wishes from Lockerbie, and I hope to see you on site soon, or in real life at some Burns event at some point soon as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.